In the sweltering heat of the Sahel, where jihadist insurgents wage a relentless guerrilla war against Burkina Faso security forces, one figure stands out not just as a commander-in-chief, but as a comrade in arms. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 37-year-old interim president who seized power in a 2022 coup, has repeatedly placed himself amid the chaos of the front lines, a stark departure from the insulated command styles that have long defined many African leaders. Traoré's approach harks back to his days as a low-ranking artillery officer, where he cut his teeth in counterterrorism operations. Before rising to lead the nation, he participated in grueling missions, including the 7-month Operation Otapuanu in Burkina Faso's volatile east, coordinating ambushes and reconnaissance under constant threat. But even after assuming the presidency, Traoré has refused to retreat to the safety of the capital's presidential palace. Instead, he has made unannounced visits to forward operating bases, addressed troops face-to-face, and shared in the hardships that define their daily reality, from dust-choked patrols to the ever-present risk of improvised explosive devices. Just last month, in June 2025, Traoré traveled to Peu, a southern town near the front lines, to speak directly with soldiers engaged in operations against insurgent strongholds. Dressed in fatigues and flanked only by a small security detail, he declared the fight a response to aggression, not a choice, emphasizing Burkina Faso's sovereignty in the face of external influences. Eyewitness accounts from troops described the visit as electric. He didn't just give a speech, he listened to our stories, asked about our equipment shortages, and promised reinforcements on the spot. One anonymous soldier told local media, "Such moments are not isolated." In November 2024, a surprise frontline visit reportedly boosted morale so significantly that units pushed back insurgents in a subsequent offensive, reclaiming several villages in the north. This hands-on style contrasts sharply with the leadership norms across much of Africa, where heads of state, often former military men themselves, issue orders from air-conditioned bunkers or opulent offices, far removed from the mud, blood, and exhaustion of the battlefield. In countries like Mali, Niger, and Chad, where similar insurgencies rage, juntas and elected leaders alike delegate the dirty work to subordinates, many of whom endure not only combat but also inadequate supplies, delayed pay, and high casualty rates without their commanders ever witnessing the toll firsthand. Reports from human rights organizations highlight how this detachment fosters resentment. Soldiers feel like pawns in a game played by elites who reap the political rewards while bearing none of the pain. In Burkina Faso under previous regimes, for instance, corruption scandals revealed how funds meant for troops vanished into pockets, leaving fighters to scavenge for basics while leaders attended international summits. Traoré's difference lies in his embodiment of the revolutionary ethos he often invokes, drawing parallels to Burkina Faso's iconic leader Thomas Sankara, who in the 1980s led by example in everything from farming cooperatives to anti-corruption drives. By embedding himself in the operational theater, Traoré signals a deeper understanding of the heart and pain of warfare, the physical strain of 12-hour patrols, the psychological weight of losing comrades, and the logistical nightmares of supplying remote outposts. His visits extend beyond pep talks. In May 2025, he toured military hospitals, inspecting wounded fighters and issuing directives for new infrastructure and advanced equipment, a move that underscored his commitment to those paying the ultimate price. This leadership model has ripple effects. Military recruitment has surged under Traoré's tenure, with over 14,000 new soldiers enlisting in 2024 alone, as part of an aggressive mobilization drive that includes arming civilian volunteers for the defense of the homeland, VDP. Analysts note that Traoré's presence fosters unity and loyalty, transforming a once-fractured army into a more cohesive force. When the president shares your risks, it changes everything, a VDP volunteer shared in a recent interview. Yet, this approach also amplifies the dangers. Rumors persist of assassination attempts, including a shadowy incident in early 2025 where Traoré's convoy was reportedly targeted during a troop inspection. As Burkina Faso grapples with escalating attacks, jihadist groups controlling nearly 40% of the territory, the question lingers. Can Traoré's frontline ethos sustain the momentum against an insurgency that has displaced millions and claimed thousands of lives? With alliances forming in the Alliance of Sahel states and whispers of foreign interference growing louder, His personal stake in the fight may prove pivotal in shaping the nation's response. What sets Traoré apart even further is his embodiment of a rare breed of leadership in Africa, one that rejects the entrenched culture of detachment and self-enrichment that has plagued the continent for decades. In an era where many heads of state ascend to power through political maneuvering or inherited privilege, Traoré's trajectory from battlefield grit to the presidency positions him as a singular figure. A leader who not only understands the visceral demands of service but lives them, refusing to insulate himself from the very struggles he commands others to endure. Consider the archetype of the aloof African leader, a trope unfortunately rooted in reality across numerous nations. From the opulent villas of Luanda in Angola to the fortified compounds in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, presidents and prime ministers often govern from ivory towers. Their experiences of war, limited to strategy sessions in climate-controlled war rooms or via secondhand reports from aides. These figures, many without a single day of frontline exposure, issue decrees that send young men and women into harm's way, oblivious or indifferent, to the bone-deep fatigue of endless vigils, the sting of sand-blasted winds, or the haunting silence after a firefight. In Nigeria, for instance, successive administrations have battled Boko Haram from afar, with leaders like former President Muhammadu Buhari, a retired general, rarely venturing beyond secured perimeters despite his military background. The result? A disconnect that breeds inefficiency, as commands filter through layers of bureaucracy, often diluted or distorted, leaving troops to improvise amid shortages that could have been foreseen with first-hand insight. Traoré, by contrast, knows the essence of servitude not as an abstract ideal but as a daily grind. His refusal to delegate the danger speaks to a philosophy of shared sacrifice, one that echoes Sankara's revolutionary call for leaders to produce what we consume and consume what we produce. In practical terms, this means Traoré has been spotted eating the same rations as his soldiers during base visits, forgoing the lavish spreads that characterize state functions elsewhere. During a 2024 inspection in the northern region of Dori, amid reports of heavy clashes with Al-Qaeda affiliates, Traoré reportedly joined a night patrol, rifle in hand, to assess vulnerabilities firsthand. Leadership isn't about titles, it's about example, he stated in a subsequent address, a sentiment that resonates deeply in a country weary of betrayal. This stands in glaring opposition to the epidemic of embezzlement that has hollowed out African economies, where leaders siphon public funds into offshore accounts while their nations languish in debt. The Panama Papers and subsequent leaks have exposed how figures like Equatorial Guinea's Teodoro Obiang Nguema Umbasogo amassed fortunes in the billions through oil revenues, even as over 70% of his population lives in poverty. In Burkina Faso's own history, the ousted regime of Blaise Compaoré was marred by allegations of graft, with investigations revealing millions diverted from military budgets to personal luxuries, private jets, European estates, and designer wardrobes, while soldiers fought with outdated gear and empty stomachs. Such corruption perpetuates a vicious cycle. Underfunded armies falter, insurgencies gain ground, and instability justifies further authoritarian grip, all while the elite thrive. Traoré's administration has flipped the script with aggressive anti-corruption measures, including audits that recovered over $200 million in misappropriated assets by mid-2025, redirecting funds to equip frontline units with drones, armored vehicles, and medical kits. His personal austerity, residing in modest quarters and driving unarmored vehicles, serves as a rebuke to the lavish lifestyles that define so many counterparts. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe's successors continue to indulge in extravagance, with reports of multi-million-dollar birthday bashes amid hyperinflation and food shortages. Similarly, in Cameroon, Paul Biya's 42-year rule has seen him spend extended periods in Swiss hotels, his family accumulating wealth in luxury goods, while the military grapples with Boko Haram and separatists without adequate support. The human cost of this detachment extends to the next generation, as leaders shield their offspring from the chaos they perpetuate. Children of the elite flock to Ivy League universities and elite boarding schools in the West, Harvard for the sons of Kenyan officials, Oxford for the daughters of South African magnates, insulated from the crumbling infrastructure, rampant unemployment, and violence back home. In Angola, Isabel dos Santos, daughter of former President José Eduardo dos Santos, built a $2 billion empire allegedly through state contracts. residing in London and Dubai while her country's youth endure one of the world's highest infant mortality rates. This exodus of privilege underscores a profound hypocrisy. Leaders who preach nationalism yet export their families to safer shores, leaving ordinary citizens to bear the brunt of failed policies. Traoré, however, has made family accountability a cornerstone, with his own relatives reportedly involved in national service initiatives rather than expatriate luxuries. In speeches, he has lambasted this brain drain of the bourgeoisie, advocating for scholarships tied to domestic contributions. As Burkina Faso pushes for self-reliance, expelling French troops in 2023 and forging ties with Russia and Mali, Traoré's model challenges the status quo, inspiring a wave of youth activism. Yet, with economic pressures mounting from sanctions and climate-driven droughts, the sustainability of this approach remains under scrutiny as the nation navigates a path towards sovereignty amid global headwinds. At the heart of Traoré's appeal is his radical overhaul of governance in Burkina Faso, flipping the script from an era dominated by looters, those who plundered state coffers for personal gain, to one of keepers, stewards committed to safeguarding national resources for collective prosperity. This shift isn't mere rhetoric. It's evidenced in sweeping reforms that prioritize transparency and accountability. Since taking power, Traoré has initiated nationwide audits of public contracts, exposing and clawing back embezzled funds from the previous administration, including millions tied to mining concessions that once lined the pockets of elites while leaving communities in destitution. In one high-profile case in 2024, his government nationalized key gold mines previously controlled by foreign firms accused of underreporting yields, redirecting revenues to fund infrastructure like rural electrification and irrigation projects that benefit ordinary Burkinabe. This keeper mentality extends to everyday governance. Traoré's cabinet meetings are broadcast live, a novel practice in the region, allowing citizens to witness decision-making and hold officials accountable in real time, fostering a culture where public service is seen as a duty, not a gateway to wealth. Traoré's leadership embodies the Lincolnian ideal of government, by the people and for the people, adapted to Burkina Faso's context of post-colonial struggle. He has democratized power through grassroots mechanisms, such as the Faso Mebo Presidential Initiative, which empowers local communities to propose and oversee development projects, from building schools to drilling wells, ensuring that governance reflects the voices of farmers, herders, and urban workers rather than distant bureaucrats. In 2025 alone, this initiative has mobilized over 50,000 volunteers in reforestation efforts, planting millions of trees to combat desertification, a direct response to citizen petitions amid worsening climate impacts. Traoré's frequent town halls, where he fields unscripted questions from the public, further underscore this participatory ethos. Unlike predecessors who ruled through fear or favoritism, Traoré has expanded civilian militias like the VDP not just for security but as platforms for civic engagement, training participants in leadership and anti-corruption vigilance. This bottom-up approach has revitalized faith in institutions, with surveys indicating a 40% rise in public trust in government since 2022. As policies target the marginalized, free healthcare for children under 5, subsidized seeds for smallholder farmers, and vocational programs for youth displaced by conflict. Remarkably, in a continent where scandals often define tenures, Ibrahim Traoré stands as one of the few African leaders with an unblemished corruption record to date. Independent watchdogs, including Transparency International's regional assessments, have noted 0 personal allegations against him, a rarity in a nation historically ranked among the most corrupt. His administration's zero-tolerance policy has led to the prosecution of over 200 former officials for graft, recovering assets equivalent to 15% of the national budget. Traoré's own lifestyle reinforces this integrity. He reportedly draws a modest salary, donates portions to veteran funds, and has publicly disclosed his assets, a move that shames the opacity of many peers. This clean slate isn't accidental. It's rooted in his Sankara-inspired ideology, which views corruption as a betrayal of the revolution, and has been bolstered by digital tracking systems for public expenditures, making embezzlement harder to conceal. Yet, this integrity has come at a cost in international optics. Western media and governments have often painted Traoré as a villain, a tyrant, or anti-Western zealot. amplifying narratives of authoritarianism while downplaying his reforms. Outlets like those affiliated with the Council on Foreign Relations have labeled his rule a cult, critiquing his expulsion of French forces and pivot to Russian partnerships as destabilizing, even as they ignore similar alliances elsewhere. Traoré himself has accused Western outlets of manipulation, arguing they fabricate stories to undermine African sovereignty, such as exaggerated reports of human rights abuses that overlook jihadist atrocities. But against this darkened portrayal, Traoré's good works serve as a beacon. His administration's success in reclaiming territory from insurgents, liberating over 100 villages in 2024 through community-backed operations, and boosting agricultural output by 25% via local initiatives have illuminated his path, earning quiet admiration even from skeptics. This luminosity has ignited fervent support among young Burkinabe and Africans continent-wide, transforming Traoré into a symbol of resurgence. In Ouagadougou's streets and online forums, millennials and Gen Z hail him as the people's captain, with social media campaigns like #Traoré2025 amassing millions of views, praising his visa-free policy for Africans as a step toward unity. Across the Sahel and beyond, from protests in Senegal to youth movements in Nigeria, Traoré's model inspires calls for similar accountability, with Pan-African influencers crediting him for awakening a generation to reject neo-colonialism. Polls from organizations like Good Governance Africa show 70% approval among under 35s in Burkina Faso, driven by his focus on education reforms and job creation in tech and agribusiness. This groundswell extends digitally, where X posts and viral videos celebrate his frontline leadership, fostering a sense of shared destiny. As this momentum builds, observers note that no force on earth, be it sanctions, media smears, or covert interventions, seems capable of halting the massive rising of Africa and its people. Traoré's Burkina Faso exemplifies this awakening, a continent shedding dependencies, with the alliance of Sahel states expanding to challenge ECOWAS's Western-leaning structures, and youth-led initiatives pushing for resource nationalization from Mali to Zimbabwe. Economic indicators reflect this tide. Burkina Faso's GDP growth hit 6% in 2024 amid global slowdowns, fueled by domestic mining and farming booms, while cultural shifts see artists and activists invoking Traoré's ethos in music and manifestos, proclaiming an irreversible era of self-determination. Still, challenges loom, from insurgent adaptations to diplomatic isolations, as regional dynamics evolve with the potential for broader alliances or conflicts. Amid this rising tide, however, Traoré has faced a barrage of controversial allegations from Western media outlets, often amplified by US and European officials, painting him as a self-serving autocrat unfit for leadership. These claims, ranging from personal profiteering off Burkina Faso's gold reserves to incompetence in combating jihadists and authoritarian tendencies threatening democracy, have been wielded like weapons in a broader narrative war. Yet, a closer examination reveals these accusations as largely unsubstantiated propaganda, designed to discredit African leaders who dare to challenge neo-colonial exploitation and assert true sovereignty, thereby preventing the continent's self-empowerment. Take, for instance, the persistent allegation that Traoré is siphoning Burkina Faso's gold resources for personal gain. In April 2025, U.S. Marine Corps General Michael Langley, head of AFRICOM, testified before Congress, accusing Traoré of diverting gold revenues to fund his personal security rather than national development. This narrative quickly spread through outlets like CNN and the New York Times, framing Traoré as a corrupt strongman hoarding wealth amid his people's suffering. However, Burkina Faso's government swiftly rebuked these claims as sweeping assertions without evidence, highlighting their own anti-corruption drives that recovered hundreds of millions in stolen assets from prior regimes. Independent analyses, including from South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, dismissed the U.S. accusations as baseless attempts to undermine Traoré's nationalization of mines, which redirected profits from foreign corporations to local infrastructure and social programs. Far from enriching himself, Traoré has lived austerely, with no verified reports of lavish personal assets. Instead, gold revenues under his watch have funded military equipment, hospitals, and agricultural initiatives, boosting GDP by 6% in 2024 despite global headwinds. Critics argue this smear campaign stems from Traoré's expulsion of Western mining giants, like those from Canada and Australia, who previously extracted billions while leaving Burkina Faso impoverished. A classic tactic to vilify leaders who prioritize African resources for Africans. Equally insidious is the charge that Traoré has failed to conquer jihadist insurgents, with some Western voices implying his incompetence or even collusion, while ignoring evidence of external sponsorship fueling the chaos. Publications such as Foreign Policy and The Economist have highlighted jihadist control over 40% of Burkina Faso's territory, portraying Traoré's strategies as ineffective. Yet, this insurgency predates Traoré's rule, exploding under previous pro-Western governments that allowed French bases and failed to stem the violence spilling from Mali since 2012. Under Traoré, military operations have reclaimed over 100 villages, bolstered by Russian and Chinese arms deals that replaced ineffective French support. Traoré himself has publicly accused Western powers, particularly France and the US, of sponsoring jihadists to destabilize the region, pointing to foiled coup attempts, over 16 since 2022, linked to foreign intelligence. Reports from the International Crisis Group and local sources corroborate this, noting how arms from NATO stockpiles in Libya have flowed to groups like JNIM, sustaining the conflict to justify Western intervention and resource grabs. Rather than failure, Traoré's pivot to the alliance of Sahel states has coordinated cross-border efforts, exposing how Western aid often perpetuated dependency and violence, not resolution. Reddit.com, Facebook.com. Then there's the label of dictator and threat to democracy, a refrain echoed in Deutsche Welle, The Guardian, and U.S. State Department briefings, which decry Traoré's suspension of elections and media crackdowns as authoritarian overreach. These narratives conveniently overlook the context. Burkina Faso's transition charter delayed polls until security stabilizes, a pragmatic response to jihadist threats that disrupted prior elections under civilian rule. Traoré, who rose via popular coups against corrupt predecessors, enjoys widespread support. Polls show 70% approval among youth, fueled by his inclusive policies like community-led development and anti-corruption trials. Far from a tyrant, he's likened to Thomas Sankara for his revolutionary zeal, with viral social media praise hailing him as Africa's most important leader. This dictator trope mirrors historical smears against figures like Gaddafi or Lumumba, used to justify interventions when leaders reject Western puppetry and pursue Pan-African unity. In reality, Ibrahim Traoré emerges as the antithesis of these caricatures, a man deeply attuned to his people's aspirations, prioritizing their welfare over foreign dictates. His initiatives, from free healthcare expansions to youth employment in agribusiness, reflect a governance model centered on Burkinabe needs, earning him adoration across Africa as a beacon of hope. By debunking these fabrications, one uncovers a pattern. Western propaganda targets those who halt the impoverishment of Africa, framing resistance as villainy to maintain control. As Traoré's supporters rally on platforms like X, sharing stories of his integrity and vision, the discourse shifts toward empowerment, as regional dynamics evolve with the potential for broader alliances or conflicts. Central to this empowerment is the unyielding resolve of Burkina Faso's military, which, far from slumbering in the face of dual threats, terrorism and neo-colonialism, stands vigilant and proactive, shoulder to shoulder with their leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, in a concerted push toward lasting peace and stability. This synergy between commander and troops exemplifies a revitalized defense apparatus, one that has transformed from a beleaguered force into a dynamic engine of national reclamation, actively dismantling insurgent networks while repelling external manipulations that have long exacerbated the Sahel's woes. Under Traoré's guidance, the Burkina Faso Armed Forces (FAB) have ramped up operations with unprecedented intensity, conducting over 500 targeted strikes against jihadist positions in the first half of 2025 alone, reclaiming vast swaths of territory in the north and east that were once insurgent havens. These efforts include sophisticated drone surveillance and rapid response units, bolstered by new alliances with Russia and China, which have provided advanced weaponry and training to replace the ineffective partnerships of the past. In May 2025, a major offensive in the Somme province neutralized key al-Qaeda affiliates, liberating several villages and disrupting supply lines that had sustained the militants for years. Traoré's frontline presence during these campaigns, often coordinating from forward bases, has not only boosted troop morale but also ensured tactical decisions are grounded in real-time intelligence, minimizing civilian casualties and maximizing impact. Soldiers describe him as one of us, sharing in the rigors of desert patrols, where temperatures soar above 45 degrees Celsius and ambushes lurk behind every dune, forging a bond that translates into fiercer, more unified combat performance. This military awakening extends beyond counterterrorism to a broader crusade against neo-colonialism, which Traoré frames as the root enabler of instability. By expelling French troops in 2023 and scrutinizing foreign NGOs suspected of espionage, the FAB has neutralized covert influences that allegedly funneled arms to insurgents, perpetuating chaos to justify resource extraction. In a landmark operation in June 2025, security forces seized over $1.2 million in terrorism equipment linked to Western-backed elements, thwarting a plot against Traoré and exposing networks that sought to undermine Burkina Faso's sovereignty. These actions align with the Alliance of Sahel States joint patrols, which have curtailed cross-border jihadist movements, fostering regional stability and reducing attacks by 30% in border areas compared to 2024. The military's integration of civilian volunteers for the defense of the homeland (VDP) has further amplified this fight, training over 20,000 locals in self-defense and intelligence gathering, turning communities into active participants rather than passive victims. The waves of progress are evident. Displaced families are returning home, markets are reopening in once no-go zones, and agricultural production is rebounding, signaling a trajectory towards sustainable peace. Even skeptics acknowledge the shift. A recent U.S. congressional report praised Burkina Faso's territorial recoveries as a model for counterinsurgency, countering earlier narratives of failure. Traoré's leadership, by embedding himself in the fray, has inspired a national ethos of resilience, where the military's tireless vigilance against both bullets and betrayals paves the way for a self-determined future. As Burkina Faso charts this bold course, the world watches a nation rising from the ashes, led by a captain who fights not from afar, but from the front, proving that true stability blooms from shared sacrifice and unyielding sovereignty.